If you believe that being legal automatically means being safe, the immigration reality of January 2026 may surprise you. Today, we are breaking down the policy decisions quietly reshaping the immigration system without warnings, without headlines, and without clear timelines. As of January 2026, the United States immigration system has entered a phase where enforcement is no longer just about changing rules. It is about changing power, speed, and pressure. If you are an immigrant, a green card holder, or someone following a legal immigration process for yourself or a family member, what is happening right now is not something you can afford to ignore. The situation begins in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where the federal government has deployed more than 3,000 immigration and border enforcement agents in a sudden and aggressive operation. The Department of Homeland Security has named this deployment Operation Metro Surge. According to federal officials, the purpose of this operation is to restore public safety by targeting what they describe as the worst criminal illegal aliens. However, what is happening on the ground tells a far more complex and troubling story. The state of Minnesota formally asked a federal court to block this deployment. State officials argued that sending thousands of federal agents into the state without consent violated state sovereignty and crossed legal boundaries. The federal district court denied that request. What makes this ruling especially important is what the judge openly acknowledged in her written decision. The judge stated that the consequences of the operation were profound and even heartbreaking. Court records indicate there was evidence of racial profiling and excessive use of force by ICE and Customs and Border Protection agents. Despite acknowledging these concerns, the court ruled that the state failed to meet the legal burden required to stop the operation. The judge explained that there is no clear legal metric that defines when federal law enforcement activity crosses the line into unlawful commandeering of a state. In simple terms, the court recognized serious harm but declined to intervene because the legal threshold was not met. This creates a dangerous gap between legal authority and human impact. That gap is no longer theoretical. It has already resulted in multiple deaths. On January 7th, Renee Good became the first known resident killed by a federal agent during this surge. Days later, Alex Pretty, a 37-year-old nurse and Minneapolis resident, was killed by federal immigration officials. According to protest organizers, a similar fatal shooting involving Silverio Villegas Gonzalez occurred in September of 2025. These cases are not limited to undocumented immigrants. They involve residents and citizens. As a result, the Department of Justice has opened a civil rights investigation into at least one of these deaths. However, an investigation does not automatically mean accountability, and the operation itself continues. Leadership on the ground has also shifted. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino has exited the region, and enforcement efforts are now being directed by Tom Homan. Homan's message has been direct. Federal presence may be reduced only if state and city officials agree to cooperate with federal authorities. This is not a negotiation, it is leverage. Public reaction has been intense and nationwide. In Minneapolis, protesters formed a massive SOS symbol on a frozen lake. Others marched carrying a large replica of the preamble to the United States Constitution. A nationwide protest movement known as the National Shutdown called on Americans to skip work, school, and shopping to demand an end to ICE funding. Cultural figures also became involved, including a widely publicized performance by Bruce Springsteen dedicated to the victims. Media coverage escalated to the point where a former national television host was arrested during a protest, despite claiming journalistic activity. While this physical enforcement surge has captured headlines, a second and quieter shift is happening nationwide, one that may impact even more people. On January 21st, 2026, the Department of State implemented a pause on immigrant visa issuances for nationals of more than 70 countries. Interviews are still being scheduled, fees are still being collected, documents are still being reviewed, but visas are not being issued. The administration justifies this action under a renewed public charge framework. Officials state that immigrants must be financially self-sufficient and must not become a burden on American taxpayers. The issue is that this pause affects individuals who have followed the law, met all requirements, and were already deep into the legal immigration process. It is important to understand what this policy does and does not do. It does not revoke visas that have already been issued. It does not currently apply to non-immigrant visas, such as tourist visas. Dual nationals may be exempt if they apply using a passport from a non-restricted country. However, for individuals with only one nationality from a listed country, the delay is indefinite. When viewed together, these developments reveal a clear pattern. The administration is applying pressure on two fronts simultaneously. On the ground, enforcement is becoming broader, faster, and more aggressive. Inside the system, legal immigration is being slowed through administrative barriers rather than formal bans. President Trump has defended these actions by stating that the administration will do whatever it can to keep the country safe. At the same time, civil rights investigations, court rulings, and nationwide protests suggest that the legal and social tension surrounding immigration policy is far from settled. For immigrants, seniors, and families navigating the system, this moment requires attention, preparation, and awareness. Immigration is no longer just about paperwork and interviews. It is now a landscape shaped by enforcement strategy, administrative control, and political power. Silence no longer guarantees safety, and being uninformed now carries real consequences. This video is not meant to create fear, it is meant to create awareness. The immigration system has moved beyond forms and interviews. It is now driven by enforcement priorities and administrative power. Staying informed is no longer optional. It is the only way to reduce risk.